Long before the scientific awakening of medieval Europe, while much of the West was still emerging from the intellectual shadows of the early Middle Ages, a vibrant civilization was flourishing across the vast expanse of the Islamic world, from Spain in the west to Central Asia in the east, centered in cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, Cairo, and Damascus. This civilization not only preserved the legacy of ancient Greece and Rome, but also expanded it with original thought, rigorous observation, and deep compassion for human welfare. Through its scholarship, institutions, and daily practices, Islam played a quiet but transformative role in shaping the health and cultural foundations of the pre-modern Western world. One of the most enduring contributions of the Islamic world was its role as a guardian and enhancer of classical knowledge. After the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, many of the great medical and philosophical texts of antiquity, by figures such as Hippocrates, Galen, and Aristotle, were no longer studied or even accessible in Latin-speaking Europe. But in the 8th and 9th centuries, under the patronage of caliphs like those of the Abbasid dynasty, scholars in Baghdad launched an extraordinary project, the systematic translation of these works into Arabic. This effort, centered at the famed House of Wisdom Beit al-Hikmah, did far more than simply copy old ideas. Muslim thinkers critically examined them, tested their claims, and often corrected errors through direct observation and experimentation. In doing so, they turned inherited knowledge into living science. Nowhere was this more evident than in the field of medicine. Islamic physicians didn't just read about healing, they practiced it with remarkable sophistication. They established what were arguably the first true hospitals in history, known as bimaristans, from the Persian words for house of the sick. These were not merely shelters for the ill. They were well-organized medical institutions with separate wards for different diseases, pharmacies on-site, libraries for study, and even facilities for mental health. An idea centuries ahead of its time, patients received free treatment regardless of religion or social status, reflecting the Islamic ethical emphasis on compassion and social responsibility. Clean water, proper ventilation, and trained staff were standard features, setting a model of public health that would later influence European hospital design. The medical knowledge produced in this environment was both practical and theoretical. Figures like Al-Razi Rhazes in 9th century Persia wrote detailed clinical descriptions of diseases such as smallpox and measles, distinguishing between them for the first time. Al-Zarawi Abolkasis, working in 10th century Islamic Spain, authored a 30-volume medical encyclopedia that included hundreds of surgical instruments. He either invented or refined many of which are recognizable ancestors of modern tools. Perhaps most influential was Ibn Sina Avicenna, whose canon of medicine synthesized Greek, Persian, and Indian knowledge with his own insights. Organized, comprehensive, and logically structured, the canon became the standard medical textbook in European universities from the 12th century well into the 17th, testament to its clarity and authority. Equally important was the Islamic world's advancement of pharmacy and pharmacology. Muslim scholars compiled extensive lists of medicinal substances, tested their effects, and developed methods for preparing drugs such as distillation, crystallization, and the creation of syrups and ointments. They introduced new remedies like camphor, senna, and mercury compounds, and emphasized dosage, precision, and drug safety. The very word pharmacy traces its roots to Arabic, as do many terms still used today: alcohol, alkali, syrup from sharab, and elixir. Beyond medicine, Islamic civilization enriched Western culture in quieter but equally profound ways. In Al-Andalus, the Muslim-ruled regions of the Iberian Peninsula cities, like Cordoba and Toledo, became beacons of learning, tolerance, and urban refinement. At a time when many European towns lacked basic sanitation, Cordoba boasted street lighting, paved roads, and an advanced water supply system with aqueducts and public baths. Personal hygiene was deeply embedded in daily life, reinforced by religious practices such as wudu, ritual ablution before prayer, which encouraged frequent washing and cleanliness. Public bathhouses, hammams, were not only places of hygiene but also social and cultural centers. This knowledge began to flow into Christian Europe, primarily through two gateways, Sicily and Spain. After the Christian reconquest of Toledo in 1085, a remarkable translation movement began. Scholars often working in teams of Muslims, Jews, and Christians translated Arabic scientific and medical texts into Latin. These translations, carried northward into France, Italy, and England, ignited a revival of learning, known as the 12th century Renaissance. Universities in Bologna, Paris, and Salerno began teaching medicine based on Avicenna and Al-Razi, The very structure of these universities, with formal degrees, curricula, and scholarly debate may have been inspired by earlier Islamic models of organized education in Madrid. Moreover, the Islamic world transformed European agriculture and diet through irrigation techniques like the Qanat underground water channels and the Noria water wheel. Muslims made arid lands fertile. They introduced crops previously unknown in Europe: oranges, lemons, rice, sugarcane, spinach, eggplants, and cotton. These not only diversified diets, but also improved nutrition and economic life across the Mediterranean. In sum, long before the High Middle Ages, the Islamic world served as both a reservoir and a river of knowledge, preserving the wisdom of the ancients and carrying it forward with innovation and care. Its contributions to health were not limited to grand theories, but extended to everyday practices that elevated standards of cleanliness, care, and public welfare. Culturally, it offered a model of urban life, intellectual curiosity, and cross-cultural exchange that helped pull Europe out of stagnation. Though often overlooked in traditional Western narratives, this legacy was essential in laying the groundwork for the later scientific and cultural flowering of Europe.